In World War II, thousands of Jewish people were forced out of Germany. This began the search for a Jewish homeland. The Jews decided to go to Israel. The Palestinians were not very happy about the Jews coming to their land, which spurred conflict. After a lot of fighting, the UN formed two separate states, giving Israel its independence on May 14, 1948. That same day, Israel was invaded by 6 Islamic states: Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. Israel won that war and took some of the Palestinians' land in the process. In 1956, there was a second Israeli war, otherwise known as the Suez Conflict. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser sent troops to take over the British-controlled Suez Canal. Britain looked to France and Israel to help them retake the canal. With Israeli troops on the ground and French and British air forces, Egypt was quickly defeated. Later, the United States and the USSR told Israel to give the canal back to Egypt. Israel withdrew from the war, ending the conflict. The third conflict was known as the Six-Day War in 1967. This war had Israel versus Egypt, Jordan, Iran, and Syria. Israel was very prepared for the battle and defeated them all in only 6 days. Israel's captured areas were used as a buffer zone against more attacks. Israel lost around 800 people, while the Arabs lost over 15,000. The fourth Arab-Israeli conflict was the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Anwar Sadat, the successor to Nasser, planned with a few other Arab countries to attack Israel. They planned to attack on Yom Kippur, which is one of the most important holidays in the Jewish religion. The Israelis were not prepared and they suffered huge casualties. Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, launched a counterattack to regain any territory that was lost. Each side lost a lot of people and they decided to a truce. The Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, was an organization formed in 1964 in order to help Palestine be recognized as a state and recover lost land. It started out as an organization made up of laborers, teachers, lawyers, and guerrilla fighters. After a while, the guerrilla fighters took over the group and insisted that the only way to become a state was to go to war. In 1969, Yasser Arafat became the chairman of the PLO. They attacked Israel multiple times and had help from other Arab nations who allowed them to use their land. In November of 1977, 4 years after the Yom Kippur War, the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, decides to try and make peace with Israel. Sadat invites the Knesset, or Israeli parliament, to a meeting where they make an agreement. It stated that if they wanted to be peaceful, Israel had to recognize Palestinian rights and would have to give back territory won in previous wars. In 1978, Jimmy Carter invites Sadat and Menachem Begin, Israeli Prime Minister, to Camp David in Maryland. Sadat and Carter spent a total of 13 days coming up with the final agreements. They decided that Egypt would acknowledge Israel as a state, and in return, Israel would give back the Sinai Peninsula. This agreement, otherwise known as the Camp David Accords, was signed in 1979 and ended 30 years of hostility between Egypt and Israel. In 1981, a group of Muslim extremists assassinated Sadat. Hosni Mubarak became Egypt's new leader. While Israel and Egypt were now on better terms than before, Israel and Palestine were not as peaceful. The Palestinians lived on Israeli land on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. There was talk of uprisings by the Palestinians, and Israel responds aggressively by bombing suspected rebel bases. The Israeli army invades Lebanon to destroy Palestinian strongholds, but soon withdraws. All of this made Palestine very angry, and in 1987, the First Intifada was held. An intifada is an uprising or campaign of Palestinian frustration with Israel. Intifadas included boycotts, demonstrations, attacks on Israeli soldiers, and any other kind of protest. In October of 1991, Israel and Palestine decide to meet for peace talks. Secret talks were held in Oslo, Norway, leading to an agreement called the Declaration Principle, or the Oslo Peace Accords, signed on September 13, 1993. They said that Israel would give Palestine self-rule of the Gaza Strip and West Bank. The Prime Minister of Israel was soon assassinated by a Jewish extremist and was replaced with Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu opposed the peace accords, but made an effort to keep them. In 1999, Ehud Barak won the election to become Israeli Prime Minister. The general public saw him as a stronger supporter of peace than Netanyahu had been. In July of 2000, Bill Clinton hosted a 15-day summit meeting at Camp David between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat of Egypt. This meeting stalled peace plans and no compromise was made. Uprisings began taking place and the situation intensified. Suicide bombers became a new weapon. Israeli forces moved into Palestinian refugee camps to get militants. In doing so, they destroyed buildings and bulldozed areas. In 2001, Ariel Sharon was elected Prime Minister of Israel. He was not willing to participate in the next peace talk with Palestinian leaders, and Israel decides to cut off contacts until Palestinian attacks end. Relations continued to get worse when they were no longer able to meet. Israel and Palestine kept having peace talks up until a few weeks ago. But recently, the talks were stuck in a stalemate, and Israel stopped peace talks with Palestine. The stop was due to the reuniting of Fatah and Hamas. Fatah and Hamas are the two major Palestinian factions that were split for 7 years. They recently agreed to end the split and form a coalition government. Hamas has been considered a terrorist group by Israel, the U.S., and European Union due to multiple attacks to Israel. Israel refuses to communicate with them at all, and therefore can no longer communicate with Fatah as they are now united. Palestine argues they need Hamas on board with any deal Israel and Fatah make. Their plan is to have the first election in Palestine since 2006 that would bring the factions together. But, just as Israel will not talk to Hamas, Hamas criticizes Israel's decisions and will not communicate with them either, so the situation is still in a standstill with peace talks. Dun, 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 dun.
There's a napkin.
Oh!
There's a napkin.
On what? You're looking a bit sweaty.
On what?
Do you need to be?
You look stressed.
Should clean you up a little bit.
Do you have a razor?